Each night, a candle is lit, and the whispering tomes open. Inside are the strange, the forgotten, the stories time tried to silence. Some say history is written by the victors, but here the lost are given voice. Breathe deeply and follow me into the hidden chapters of history.
Before we begin tonight's journey, I want to ask you something simple. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these quiet stories travel. Now, settle in. Because the word Anunnaki has been twisted, stretched, and turned into something unrecognizable by the internet. Every day, new videos promise hidden planets, secret visitors, and ancient technologies buried under desert sands. But the truth, the real truth, is far more fascinating than any of that. Tonight, we're going back to the clay, to the tablets, to the cities where the first stories were written by hand under torchlight. And if you enjoy these calm explorations into obscure history, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next night's journey. Now, let's step into the past and let the clay speak for itself. The tablet already says their name, Anunnaki, a council of gods seated above a city of canals. Meanwhile, a modern voice insists they were aliens here for gold and jeans. Those two images don't belong on the same shelf. Tonight, we stay with clay. We stay with tablets that name fields, rations, vows, and gods who set destiny. Sumer, Akud, Babylon, the first cities built order, then told stories to make that order feel real. The promise is simple, only what archaeology and standard translations support. I'll show you why Anunnaki equals aliens doesn't match a single tablet. To see it, we go back to the first cities. The first cities and why gods needed jobs. If you want to meet the idea that birthed the Anunnaki, you start where two rivers spread and sulk and shine. Southern Mesopotamia was a flat, stubborn canvas. The floods came early, or late, or not at all. Too little water-hardened fields. Too much salted them white. A harvest was a negotiation with mud. People learned to steer that mud. Ditches became canals. Canals needed gauges, dredging crews, foremen, and schedules. Villages of reed and clay grew into towns with storehouses, quays, and terraces. A few became cities that could move grain, wool, timber, and copper along water like a bloodstream. Temples sat at the center, not as quiet sanctuaries, but as engines. They owned fields and herds, set rations, paid workers in beer and bread, and planned work seasons. Administrators pressed marks into wet clay. So many baskets of barley to the brewery. So many men to clear this reach. Repair the quay before date harvest. Writing began here as numbers and signs that kept a city's breath steady. Councils met in courtyards. An NC governed as steward of a guard. A Luga literally, a big man, carried the city's fate in war and treaty. Authority had steps and rails. You can feel them in the tablets that love lists and measures. It's the sound of people discovering that survival depends on shared rule. Now remember the risk. One breach in a bank could drown a district. One silted channel could choke a year. To keep thousands in sync, you need more than orders. You need an idea that says this whole arrangement is anchored higher than any one foreman. That's where gods get jobs. The divine world mirrors the civic one. There's a high figure on the skythalt more than seen. There's Enlil, the force of air and authority, seated at Nipper, where kings come for recognition. There's Enki at Eridu, lord of fresh water and craft, the patron who solves problems and keeps systems running. With them move Ninhursag, Utu, Inanna, Nonich, bound to a city and a domain the people knew in their hands. Light, time, love and war, birth, the sweet water that makes grain rise. Put them together and you don't get a chaos of thunderbolts. You get a council, the Anunnaki, the princely seed, the offspring of the sky sit as the High Assembly. They assign roles. They decree destinies. They approve kingship. They witness oaths. Their court is what a city hopes its own councils are. Consistent, measured, binding. Art makes this visible. A horned crown marks divinity. A seated guard extends a rod and ring symbols of measured authority to a human who approaches with open hand and lowered eyes. Cylinder seals roll this scene again and again. Power is granted, not grabbed. It's sized to fit a task. Scribes loved another word. Me culture, powers, temple building, kingship, music, weaving, truth, victory, even strife. In stories, Enki keeps these in his house at Eridu Inanna. Bold and quick, brings a set to Uruk. The point isn't spectacle, it's administration. Civil life runs on assigned functions. The gods hold the charter. Cities hold the copy. Why did this matter so much? Because the land was unstable and the economy collective. Irrigation means you and your neighbor rise or fail together. A sanction from the high courts, spoken in ritual, echoed in tablet turns, a hard demand into a shared duty. The canal crew reports at dawn land softer when the year is said to be approved above. Human stakes stay closed. An oath sworn before the Anunnaki isn't a flourish. It's a way to make a boundary stone hold when tempers run hot. Break the oath, and you don't just cheat a neighbor, insult the whole senior board. In a place where water lines equal lifelines, the threat protects fields and families. Meanwhile, something else is happening. Divination becomes a craft. If the assembly speaks destinies, people want to read out. Oil on water, the liver of a sheep, the path of the moonage, becomes a page where the gods' decisions can be glimpsed, not to freeze choice, but to time it. A wind from a given quarter during an eclipse means delay the campaign, reinforce the bank. It's risk management in ritual dress. This is the moment everything snaps into focus. The Anunnaki aren't visitors. They are governance scaled to the cosmos. The first cities reached for a language that could bind a year, a rain, a flood season to more than luck. They found it in a council that sits above Nipper's courts and below a sky that runs on cycle. When later myths say the assembly decrees, you can hear the echo of canal rosters and ration lists. So the gods take their seats. Duties are assigned. Power is measured. And still work strains. Growth presses. You could almost hear the next complaint rising from the crews along a muddy cut, who the Anunnaki are in early tech. Set to understand the name. We go back to a quiet Sumerian phrase, the Ana, the princely Sitai, the offspring of an ant, the sky. In Akkadian, the term becomes Anunnaki. It isn't a badge for a spaceship crew. It's the label for the hive family, the senior circle whose decisions give the world its structure. Early hymns don't pin it to a fixed head count. The roster flexes by city and by century. What matters is rank and function. They sit, they deliberate, they decree. At Nipa Enlil's city, this takes on a legal shape. Kings come to be recognized, not made. The language says Enlil fixes their fate, but the ritual picture is a court acknowledging a claim. In lists and hymns, you'll hear about the great gods who set destinies, a phrase that returns like drumbeat. Sometimes 7 are named as Sinia. Elsewhere, the assembly widens. The consistency is procedural. When the Anunnaki sat, a binding decision followed. Their work is described through the myths, the culture powers, kingship, temple building, truth, weaving, music, victory, even strife. In stories copied for schoolroom, Enki keeps these in the Sweetwater house at Eridu. Inanna obtains a share for Uruk. It reads like logistics, not spectacle. Functions assigned, responsibilities moved, cities equipped. The term Anunnaki hangs over this as the guarantor that these powers aren't random favors, but chartered elements of a livable world. Boths bring the group into daily life. A boundary grunt, alone, a treaty scribes, sometimes invoke the Anunnaki as witnesses. It's a way of saying, this isn't just between neighbors. If someone moves a stone or cheats a measure, the insult travels beyond the canal bank. Kudru boundary stones from later centuries keep the spirit. Curse formulas call down the Anunnaki alongside specific gods, because a shared field needs shared enforcement. En narrated, their assembly appears at turning points. In the creation sequence preserved in Atrahasis, a labor crisis leads to the plan for humankind. The junior gods revolt. The elders convene. Enki proposes a remedy. Ninta, the birth goddess, shapes the clay. The Anunnaki are not tinkering with devices. They're adjudicating a workload and authorizing a new order where people take up baskets and ledgers. The logic is administrative and social, not mechanical. Destiny language gives the council bite. A decree isn't a vague omen. It's the line that will hold unless countered by another formal act. That's why divination grows around this belief. If the Anunnaki fix outcomes in principle, humans look for the best time to act in practice. The Omen series, later named Enuma Elish, Enlil catalogues of sky sins exists to read timing within an ordered world. It's a conversation across levels, decree above, discernment below. Nipa anchors the picture, but the map is broader. Enlil's court signals legitimacy. Eridu's, Abzu, Enki's domain, supplies wisdom and craft. Your measures months by Nonna's light. Sipa and Lhasa link Utu's justice with daylight. Uruk embodies Inanna's force and civic glory. When a hymn praises the Anunnaki of a city, it's usually praising the way that city's life fits a larger charter. The title is the umbrella under which specific powers operate. Iconography keeps the signs straight. The horned crown marks divinity. The rod and ring in a god's hand mark measured authority. Cylinder seals show supplicants approaching a seated deity. The scene's grammar says the same thing the texts do. Power is loaned, scaled, witnessed. No rays, no helmets, no engines, just regalia you'd recognize if you've read a law code or stood in a temple court. By the early second millennium, a symbolic object appears in Mytha, Tablet of Destinies. When it's stolen, order shakes. When it's restored, commands hold again. It's an image that makes a legal idea tactile. Take away the record that authorizes decree, and chaos follows. Return it to the proper court, and the system breathes. The Anunnaki are the body that authenticates that tablet's words. The term shifts with time without losing its spine. In Sumerian contexts, the Anana are the high family. In old Babylonian narratives, the senior assembly that sets fates. By the first millennium, the title often names the underworld, Judges 7, in some compositions who sit beneath. Ereshkigal's rule. That's not a contradiction. It's a redistribution of duties. The same elder authority presides where it's needed. Bright court above, bench below. Meanwhile, texts contrast Igaku for the Sky Company and Anunnaki for the Chthonic Court. A neat file folder system that suited scholars who liked order. Through all of it, the human angle is steady. People swear by the Anunnaki because they want promises to bind beyond a lifespan. Rulers seek their approval because water and walls depend on consent. Priests read signs because they believe fixed decree and wise timing can coexist. When you hear the name in early texts, hear a council chamber, not a cockpit. Hear a vote, a seal, a recorded fate, and feel the relief of a city that believes someone reliable is keeping minutes. Creation by clay and council, Atrahasis core. The trouble starts with sore shoulders. In the old Babylonian poem we call Atrahasis, the junior gods have been doing the heavy work, digging channels, hauling baskets, raising levees in the dark before dawn. Years pass in the rhythm of mud and song. Then they stop. They surround Enlil's house and throw down their tools. It's a strike, not a war. The message is plain. This workload isn't sustainable. Till a council gathers. Rage cools into procedure. Breaking your own workforce would only shift the crisis. Enki, the god of fresh water and craft, speaks up with a plan that sounds less like magic and more like policy. Make a new being, he says, one that can understand orders, keep accounts, lift baskets, tend fires, and stand before an altar with steady hands. Share the burden downward, not sideways. How mix clay from the life-bearing ground with a measure of divine life, not to create monsters, but to seed capacity, speech, attention, memory. A god associated with intelligence will supply blood. The mother goddess, called Nintu or Mummy, will shape forms. The elders agree. It's a remedy that fits the problem. The scene that follows is intimate and practical. Clay is brought up from Enki's sweet water deep. The blood is added. Incantations are spoken over the bowl. Birth goddesses gather 7 and 7 in some lands to carry the forms. A house of wombs is prepared. Time passes, counted with care. Nothing in this world escapes the calendar. When the doors open, the new creatures step out. No trumpets. They're just called people. And they're immediately placed in the system the poem set out to fix. They take up the baskets. They dredge the canals. They grind the grain, brew the beer, bake the bread, sweep temple courts, raise walls, cut reeds, and push barges against the current. In exchange, they receive rations, clothing, and protection. A compact is born alongside the species. The poem lingers on design. This isn't forced labor with no story to soften it. It's shared work with meaning. The gods are relieved of tasks that never fit their rank. Humans receive a role that fits their gifts. Enki's part continues. He tutors. He teaches tools, brickmaking, boat handling, and the craft of the midwife. Knowledge arrives in stages because order grows that way in a city. You can hear the echo in ordinary tablets. Corvée lists send crews to dredge specific reaches by week. Ration tablets measure barley for workers at a brewery. Foundation deposits under new walls ask the gods to bless the build and keep it standing. The myth explains the paperwork. The paperwork proves the myth's focus. But growth brings noise. People multiply. Their smoke and voices rise at night. Enlil, the stern guardian of order, can't sleep. Policy turns again. The council authorizes measures to reduce pressure, plague, then famine, then drought. Each time, Enki quietly counsels survival, what to eat instead, where to dig. Each time, life rebounds. Compassion and limits argue in public. The next move is drastic. Flood. The gods swear to silence. Enki finds a legal seam. He speaks to a reed wall, and a wise man hears through it. Build a boat. Seal it with bitumen. Load seeds, animals, family, and skills. The storm comes. The world drowns. The boat rides it out. When waters sink, a sacrifice rises in smoke. The gods gather, hungry and regretful. Enki argues for a sustainable fix. Shorten lives, space births, temper the noise with boundaries, not annihilation. The council accepts. Terms change. Mortality becomes part of order, not only a penalty. The system gains a ceiling so it can last. In some versions, the survivor receives long life far away. Everyone else lives within limits that make crowded land bearable. Note what isn't here. No engines, no helmets, no export lists, for or. Clay plus divine blood is not a lab note. It's a ritual rationale for why humans can speak to gods and carry culture. Bitumen is not rocket fuel. It's the sealant that keeps a riverboat from leaking. The flood is not a cosmic reset without reason. It's policy harsh, then revised after growth overwhelms capacity. Atrahasis isn't a spectacle layered on top of daily life. It's daily life raised to myth, so cities can explain themselves to themselves. The Anunnaki's role is consistent. Convene, weigh consequences, authorize remedies, recalibrate when mercy and order clash. Creation here means staffing the world, and once people stand up, the clay tablets of rations rusteth, and vows read like the long footnotes to that first decree. The flood as policy, not spectacle. Noise became the trigger, but policy shaped the response. In the poem's rhythm, you hear a city council trying levers in order. First, plague. The decree goes out. People weaken, fires dim. It works briefly. Enki whispers a counter. Appease the plague god with offerings. Isolate, wash, resume, then famine. Fields fail, granaries hollow. Enki suggests substitutes. Fishing and wild gather. The curve dips, then rises. Drought follows. Canals drop, wells taste of salt. Dig deeper, he says. Draw from the sweet water lair and ration with care. 3 rounds, 3 survivals. Not miracles, adjustments. The final measure is flood. This time, secrecy. The gods bind one another with an oath not to warn humankind. Enlil wants sleep and a quieter earth. Enki looks for a lawful seam and finds one. Speak to a wall. Reed walls carry sound. A wise man listens. The instructions are crisp enough to feel like a builder's note. Tear down your house, make a boat. Abandon property, save life. Load seeds of living things, provisions, tools, and the people you'll need when ground returns. Seal everything with bitumen. Bitumen matters here. It's common on the lower river's black pitch that seeps from the earth and hardens when worked. Boatmen know it well. They plaster seems to keep water out. They glue bricks into true lines. In a world of reeds and clay, pitch is the difference between a float and a sink. A floodboat doesn't need sails. It needs a hull that won't dissolve. This is the craft of a delta, not a launch pad. The storm arrives like a verdict. In some lines, 6 days and 7 nights. In others, the count shifts. Either way, the picture is the same. Wind, tears, water lifts, foundations, levees, sheer, horizons vanish. The ark pitches like a reed basket. Above, the gods are suddenly small, huddled at the edge of their own sky, which tells you something about this theology. Power writes decrees. It still flinches at consequences. The calm after is careful. Hatch open. Light. A dove sent out. It returns. A swallow. It returns. A raven. It finds a perch and doesn't. This is Philcraft wrapped in story. When the boat grounds, the first act is worship. A platform. A fire. Reeds and wood that smokes sweetly. The gods gather like flies, a line that has made readers smile for a century. It also bites. No offerings during the storm meant hunger above 2. Then comes the argument. Enlil sees survival and rages about the broken oath. Enki doesn't plead ignorance. He pleads reason. There were other tools, he says, than had drowned the world. Set bounds in the grain, not in the lungs. Shorten lives. Space births. Reserve roles for women that change fertility. The tablets vary on detail but not on sense. A sustainable fix beats a reset. This turns the flood into policy, not spectacle. Before, the world relied on divine patience and human restraint. After, it runs on terms that limit growth so a crowded land can breathe. Mortality stops being a loose accident. It's an agreed boundary. The hero receives an exceptional long life on a distant shore, which functions as proof that the council can still grant rarity while holding the rule. Memory seals the terms. The Sumerian king list draws a hard line. Kingship before the flood in cities that sound unreal. After, it reappears at Kish and walks a path archaeology can follow. At Shurupek and other sites, bands of clean river clay interrupt older layers, loco drownings. Not global ocean, but enough to burn the lesson in. When a delta shifts its channel, a city fails by water it once welcomed. You call that the flood even when it's one among many. The story traveled well because riverlands listen to each other. The later Hebrew version keeps the birds and the box. It shifts the council to a single judge and adds a promise never to repeat the act. The moral stays close, justice with mercy, a new covenant, a cap on span. Variation across traditions doesn't turn the epic into a puzzle. It shows neighbors answering the same fear with different theology. What the tablets don't do is just as important. They don't list cargoes of ore bound for a ski port. They don't turn pitch into an engine. They don't treat clay plus blood as a genetic protocol. Every concrete item in the scene sits on Mesopotamian ground. Reed, rope, pitch, riverboat logic. The flood solves a social crisis by terrifying means, then backs into a humane fix. That's why the aftermath emphasizes calendars, rites, and law. You keep the new limits alive by marking time, feeding altars, renewing oaths, and reading the sky for good timing, not for rescue. In the wake, lament and rebuilding become skills. Cities sing losses, clear mud, raise first courses, and bury foundation deposits that asked the same high court to bless the second try. A myth this sober doesn't need thunder to persuade you. It needs a memory of silt underfoot, a taste of brackish water, and a council that learns. Kingship, rod and ring, authority on loan. After the flood terms settle, cities still need someone to sign the tablet and lead the crew at dawn. Kingship appears not as a prize grabbed, but as an office that descends, is recognized, and can be revoked. The language is blunt. The gods fix the fate. A city enacts it. That's why rulers travel to Nipper. In Enlil's precinct, they don't become kings. They're acknowledged as such, which matters when a canal roster means life. Art says the same thing. The rituals say. On cylinder seals, a seated god extends a rod and ring to a human who approaches with careful posture. The shapes aren't random. The rod measures. The ring binds. Together they mean authority with limits bar, scaled to task, not seized by appetite. When you've read ration tablets and work orders, the image lands. Rule is a tool you hold against a straight edge. Texts love to tell that kingship descended from heaven. In practice, it moved from city to city when fortunes turned. The Sumerian king list marshes that movement like a ledger of offices transferred. Eridu in the memory age. Kish after the flood. Later shifts that line up with what digs find in brick and fill. The point isn't accuracy of reign lengths. It's the doctrine underneath. No city owns the chair. It borrows it under witness. Boundary stones, Skuduru, carry the logic into fields. When a king grants land or recognizes a rite of passage, the stone wears little guards carved like a roll call. The curses are clear and cold. Move this marker, steal water, falsify a measurand. May the Anunnaki blind your line, dry your fields, and make your house a ruin. It sounds fierce until you remember that in an irrigation world, one moved stone can starve a neighborhood. Harsh words protect soft ground. Oaths are the daily glue. A merchant swears by Shamash and the Anunnaki that a weight is true. A governor swears that a levy will be fair. A treaty calls the High Court to witness that 2 cities will keep a canal shed and a road open. To lie is to insult the entire senior bench. The fear isn't lightning. It's the withdrawal of legitimacy, the slow, grinding ruin that follows when no one believes a tablet means what it says. When chaos hits, the office itself can leave. Laments describe a patron god walking out and gates broken behind. In that absence, kings speak low. They declare fasts, fund repairs, and bury foundation deposits that asks the senior court to return and bless the work. When the statue comes back, processions say, "What tablets confirm? The office has returned." The rod and ring are on loan again. Across centuries, the eye can stay steady, even as names change. In one scene, Shamash hands the rod and ring to a famous lawgiver. The relief at the top of the stele makes the argument in stone. Judgment comes from daylight's god. The measures below are not whim. In other periods, Ninurta appears as the enforcer of order. Elsewhere, Marduk does. The handoff never changes. Measured power is gifted, not self-born. This is where assemblies meet. Even a powerful ruler frames decrees as confirmations of what the council above has said. He might rebuild a temple and write that Enlil approved the plan. He might redraw a canal and say that Enki advised the route. The rhetoric isn't empty. It folds public work into a shared charter. People lift baskets more willingly when they believe the High Court stamped the year. Legitimacy also breathes through failures. When a king violates the bounds, scribes say so by invoking the same grammar. A bad year. The fates fixed in Nipper were hard, a cruel levy. The office was used crookedly. The rod mismeasured. The cure is in rebellion framed as appetite. Its restoration framed as recognition. Send to Nipper, repair the rites. Swear again before all witnesses, human and divine. Even judgment below mirrors this. When the term Anunnaki shifts toward the underworld bench, oaths and curses don't lose force. They gain depth. If a cheat dies unfound, the file isn't closed. The judges beneath will hear it. The rod and ring still measure past the grave. Families who pour beer for the dead understand this as comfort. Promises bind across time because the office outlasts the person. What none of these scenes show is a throne falling from a sky door into a yard. No pilot steps out. No technical manual is handed over. Authority is a rule book written in ritual, law, and image. The king is a steward. The gods are the guarantors. The Anunnaki are the witness board that turns a man with a seal into a year that holds. So when you see the rod and ring, see a leash on power as much as a grunt. See a city that refuses to treat force as its own excuse. The first kings learned to bend under a court they couldn't see, because everyone could see the canal when it ran full, the field when it stood green, and the oath when it held. Authority in this world is always on loan. Descent and judgment, the underworld bench. While kings measured power on loan above, another bench kept order below. You see it most clearly when Inanna decides to descend. She leaves Uruk in full regalia crown, beads, sash, breastplate, and reaches the first of 7 gates. A gatekeeper lets her in, but sets a rule. At each gate she must surrender 1 piece. Crown first, then beads, then sash. At the 7th, she stands bare. This isn't humiliation for spectacle. It's procedure. Rank is a surface thing in the land beneath. The rules apply even to a goddess. Inside, she faces judgment. 7 Anunnaki of the deep sit as a court in Ereshkigal's house. There's no debate scene, no bargaining. They look, weigh, and pronounce. Inanna is struck, turned into a corpse, and hung on a hook. The message is stark but tidy. Below, the ancient authority that once set fates in the bright court now enforces them without favor. Only a rescue engineered by quick-thinking, helpless synthetic beings sent with instructions wins a temporary release. Even then, the release requires substitution. Terms matter. The bench doesn't erase its own ruling. Other lines in later epics echo this stance. In Gilgamesh, the heroes speak of the Anunnaki, who decree death and dwell with Ereshkigal. The phrase folds the bright council into the dark. The same elders' new chamber. It fits a culture that believed decisions travel beyond the grave. If a wrong goes unpunished in daylight, the file will be heard below. To grasp why this mattered, you have to see how the afterlife worked. It wasn't reward. It was a house of dust with a river called Hubba and a boatman to ferry souls. Shade life depended on the living. Families poured water and beer at set times, brought bread, burned incense, and most crucial spoke names. Tablets that describe Kispu. These offerings to the dead read like calendars for care. Miss the rites, and a neglected spirit could wander, thirsty and sore. Rituals exist to fix lapses. Incantations call on the underworld court to note the case and send the restless back to their place. Bigger language joins the same system. Boundary stones don't just invoke Shamash and city patrons. Curse columns summon the Anunnaki of heaven and earth, a formula that by the first millennium often means the full bench below. The penalties sound brutal: blindness, barrenness, ruin. They're meant as fences. In a canal land, to move a stone is to steal water. Let the oath reach past death, and even heirs will think twice. Ritual handbooks called Namburbi show the same procedural mind. When a bad sign threatens to harden into fate, a crack in a wall like a bad omen. A dog howling in a pattern priest's prescribe a reset. Burn specific woods. Bury an offering. Speak names in the right order. The aim isn't magic as theater. It's a legal strategy. Act before the decree is written. Once the Anunnaki of the deep have entered the decision in their archive, changing it will cost more than care. The underworld gains officers Nergal, a fierce power, a plague and battle, pairs with Ereshkigal. In later stories, after a rough courtship, he is not counted among the old princely seed in early Sumerian hymns, but he sits with their bench. Title flex as needs grow. The 7 judges remain a fixed image. 7 gates, 7 decrees, 7 names. Mesopotamian order loves this number. It makes dread countable. To pass 7 checkpoints is to satisfy the full process. Daily life keeps the tie alive. Graves hold bowls and lamps because the living accepted a duty to comfort the dead. Processions for the new moon included prayers that named the underworld court. Law codes punished necromancy not because the dead were unreal, but because they were owed peace and procedure. Even humor turns up in a grim place. Some incantations joke wryly about underworld scribes who, like their living counterparts, prefer neat records. The joke works because it's true. A civilization that trusted tablets on desks trusted an archive below. What none of these texts suggest is a subterranean lab or a hidden hangar. The imagery is local: gates, river, boatmen, scribes. A queen on a throne, guards at doors. Judges called Anunnaki sit to hear. They affix outcomes. They don't run machines. They don't take bribes. Inanna's own story proves it. Even the boldest goddess must submit, and even her rescue requires a swap that keeps the ledger balanced. Disdoubled seating bright court above. Bench builder solves a problem that every city faces. How do you make promises last when people don't? You attach them to an authority that outlives a generation. A boundary oath binds past the grave. A kindness to the dead binds the living to memory. A ritual to avert fate trains you to act before harm fixes. The Anunnaki of the underworld aren't villains. They're continuity in a fragile world, and the comfort is quiet. If someone cheats and dies untouched, the case isn't closed. If you love someone and fear they're forgotten, there's a month marked to say their name. The court below hears both kinds of plea with the same impartial weight. In a land of shifting channels, that steadiness is mercy. Babylon rewrites the seating chart. Order didn't stop in Sumer. It moved. It learned stagecraft, and it found a louder voice on the same plane. Babylon began as one city among many, then turned pageantry into policy. A theology followed that matched the scale of its projects. You hear it in a poem that opens with water before there was a world. When the young gods make noise, a champion steps forward. In older stories, that role belonged to Enlil on Inarita. In Babylon's telling, the name is Marduk. He faces the Sikeos, Tiamat, tests his weapons, wins, and uses her split body to frame the sky and the deep. Then he does something very Mesopotamian. He sets the calendar, fixes the courses of planets, and posts lights where they can be read. It's cosmology written by a city that loves schedules. Work returns to the center. The gods complain of labor. Marduk answers by making humans from the blood of the rebel leader. The logic mirrors Atrahasis and updates it. People will carry temple duties, canal rosters, and city walls. In return, they'll receive law and care. The contract never left the ground. The climax isn't the duel, it's the vote. The great assembly gathers and grants Marduk kingship over the gods. They hand him 50 names, titles that fold older functions into a single office. He's the one who decrees, the renewer, the builder, the one who restores cities. The Anunnaki widen here into a vast assembly that recognizes a center. In some lists, 300 of heaven and 300 of earth file under him. It isn't a census. It's a filing system that tells you who reports where. This wasn't just a story to recite in private. Each spring, The city staged the Akitu, the New Year festival. Statues crossed streets, hymns rolled through courts, and a ritual humbled the king so that God could raise him. In the temple, the high priest struck the royal cheek. Tears, if they fell, meant acceptance. The king emerged, reauthorized, and led the procession out to the festival house beyond the walls. The year began in order because power had passed inspection. Architecture joined the chorus. The temple complex of Marduk with its processional way and shining gate tied narrative to brick. A stepped tower, the house that links heaven and earth, rose as a visible axis. People who walked beneath it felt their days line up with the poem's claims. A center exists. It coordinates the parts. None of this erased the older gods. It reorganized the seeding chart. Enkidu, Eremind, the thoughtful counselor. Inanishtar kept her fierce glamour and her pull in love and war. Shamash still judged in light. Nana still paced months. The Anunnaki as a term continued to mean the Great Assembly, now convened under a capital that spoke for a wider map. Dzame grammar appears in law and brick. On a famous stele, a lawgiver stands before Shamash and receives the rod and ring. The relief argues in stone that justice has a source beyond whim. Foundation deposits buried under new walls ask Marduk and the Anunnaki to anchor the work. Boundary stones call down curses from the whole senior board on anyone who shifts a line. The theology isn't abstract. It's paperwork with ceremony. Scholars later loved to list the 50 names of Marduk, but it's the function that matters. He becomes the model of an executive who not only conquers but organizes. He sets posts, names stars as markers, reopens cities after siege, and remembers that a clogged canal can starve a district. Babylon made its guard match its needs. Politics caught the rhythm. Neighboring powers learned to borrow and adapt. Kassite rulers adopted Marduk to legitimize their tenure. Assyrians raised Ashur in their own image and recast the Dragon Slayer scene. Yet when they held Babylon, they still staged reconciliations because legitimacy flowed from that precinct. The Anunnaki remained the witness board across these shifts. Their titles stretched to fit new centers without snapping. In quiet rooms, scribes coppered the epic beside omen series, hymns, and rituals. The tablet of destinies an image of authority as a written, think found a durable home in this age. In any story where a thief steals it, collapse follows until it's returned. The lesson stayed steady. Commands mean little without the record and the court that authenticate them. If you walk this literature back to the ground, you can watch the update happen without melodrama. The flood and creation logics are intact. The council remains. What's new is emphasis. A single office coordinates the many. The Anunnaki's assembly widens under that banner. Titles proliferate to match an empire's tasks. And every year, before fields green, the ritual restates the premise. Power is on loan, inspected, and reset in public. Notice again what the tablets don't say. They don't turn Marduk into an engineer from elsewhere. His tools a decree, calendar, and measured force. His court is a council chamber, not a hangar. The Anunnaki's role remains procedural. Recognize, witness, sanction. The city is teaching itself how to be large without forgetting how to be lawful. Babylon didn't invent order. It scaled it. It wrote a manual for living under a center and made sure the gods signed each page, and the old high family. They kept their seats in a wider room. What tablets actually say? A source anchor. Let's anchor the talk in tablets you can name.
Atrahasis.
Fest survives in old Babylonian copies from places like Sippar and Ashur. The plot we traced at revolt. Council convened. Humans shaped from clay, mixed with divine blood. Labor transferred, population pressures. Flood as final lever, mercy reframing. Terms comes from those tablets. The language is workmanlike. Lists of midwife goddesses. Counts of months in the womb house. Instructions for sealing with bitumen. It explains labor and limits, not machines or minds. When people cite creation from blood, they're reading a ritual rationale for speech and cult, not a lab log. Now open the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the standard Babylonian version, the flood episode arrives when the old survivor tells the king his story. Birds are sent to test the waters. A sacrifice rises. The gods swarm like flies is the famous line. Enlil rages. A council for restraint follows. The tone is reflective, almost embarrassed by overreach. Again, no alien cargo. Just river logic, regret, and a decision to shorten spans so the system can endure. The epic stitches this memory to a meditation on mortality. Even the mightiest meet the rule that followed the flood. Turn to Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. Its imperial theology voiced as myth. Marduk orders the cosmos, fixes the calendar, and receives 50 names. Crucial lines assign human labor so the gods can rest, echoing Atrahasis with a new patron. The poem's heart isn't gadgets, it's ceremony and statecraft. Set posts, assign duties, restore cities. In ritual, priests recited it at New Year to rehearse order. If you want to know what Babylon thought power should do, this is the manual. If you're looking for launch pads, you won't find them. Drop into the descent of Ishtar, Inanna. It's terse and procedural. 7 gates, 7 removals, 7 judges. The Anunnaki appear here as the underworld bench. They pronounce, not negotiate. A rescue works only through substitution and rules. The text's economy is striking no ornament, no machines, only authority enforcing boundaries that make grief bearable and memory necessary. This is where you see the title Anunnaki sit below without losing the elder weight they carried above. Set beside those narratives an omen corpus. Enuma, Anu, Enlil. Dozens of tablets, index, sky, signs, lunar, halos, eclipses, planet positions, to compare them with historical outcomes. Its method, not mystique. A red ring around the moon with a north wind signals trouble here. A given star with a given gust favors a harvest there. Kings use this to time risks, not to track visitors. The cosmology underneath assumes a readable, lawful sky that sends advisories into a world run by decree. Prose that ties myth to ground, read the Sumerian king list. It claims kingship descended from heaven, then walks through cities that held the office before and after the flood. The reign lengths before are fantastical. After, they shrink to human scale. The point is legitimacy, transfer, and memory, not chronology alone. It's how a culture explains political change without abandoning the belief that a higher court approves each loan of power. Finally, hold a kuduru, a boundary stone from later Babylonia. The text lays out a grant, fields, exemptions, obligations. Then comes the wall of witnesses, symbols of major gods, and a column of curses that calls on the Anunnaki to punish anyone who moves the marker or falsifies the claim. It's a property document with theology baked in. The threats are exact because water lines and field edges decide whether a district thrives. Laid side by side, these sources agree on tone and purpose. Councils convene. Orders fix. Humans work. Kings borrow office. Calendars steady risk. Judges below enforce what the bright court once said. Where a modern claim asks for aliens, the tablets give you administration at scale. Where a video points to Nibiru, the late star lists use Nibiru as a crossing marker or a planet's title within a lawful sky. Where a meme insists on genetic labs, the clapless blood motif grounds speech, ritual, and duty. This is what the tablets actually say. And it's enough. The Internet's Anunnaki, a quick map of myths. Now we step into the loud room. Over the last 50 years, the Anunnaki have been cast in roles that tablets never wrote. It helps to map the claims before we test them, so you can see how each one pulls a thread from real texts and ties it to something modern audiences already want. Start with the headline claim: the Anunnaki are aliens. In this telling, they arrive from far away, plant cities, teach writing, and stand on ziggurats like captains on a deck. The appeal is simple. It makes beginnings feel clean and gives technology an ancient pedigree. The hook points at horned crowns and wings on reliefs, then says, "Look, helmets and suits." It points at the word from the sky and says, "Up there means out there." The story writes itself if you never open a tablet. Next comes gold. The pitch says these visitors needed it for their atmosphere. Mesopotamia had temples with glitter and trade routes that brought metal in. The leap is easy. Mines somewhere else. Storehouses here. A supply chain across space. Photos of boundary stones and treasure from royal graves become set dressing for a theory that treats ritual wealth like raw inventory. A third branch adds a wandering world, Nibiru. The argument goes that ancient star lists hide a rogue planet on a long orbit, due back soon. Every decade supplies a date. Then the date slips. A new chart appears. The word returns, divorced from the contexts where late scholars used it as a crossing marker or a title for a known planet. The pattern survives on suspense alone. Then comes genetic engineering. In this version, clay mixed with divine blood becomes a lab protocol. Enki becomes a scientist in a coat you can't see. Birth goddesses become technicians behind glass. The midwife's house becomes a facility. The story borrows the cadence of Atrahasis and swaps tools. Incantation for code, bowl for bench, ritual for test. A fit claim ties the Anunnaki to giants in another tradition. The link is sound, not sense names that echo across languages, floods that overlap by theme, and a desire to fuse separate canons into one master plot. Parallel motifs become proof of identity. A council becomes a cabal. The result is a web where everything points to everything else. If you squint, why do these versions spread? Spectacle outpaces patient reading. A ziggurat at sunset looks like a launch tower if you add music and a close-up. A horned crown looks like a helmet if you crop the beard. A relief with wings looks like a jetpack if you ignore that wings mean divinity across the region. Images travel faster than footnotes, and captions can bend any way a producer needs. There's also the lure of simple answers. Civilizations are hard. They require decades of canal cleaning, rationing, law, and luck. A visitor with a kit spares you that slog. A wandering planet gives you a finish line. A single council of space elders feels cleaner than 100 city councils and 1,000 scribes. The aura of age helps. Put a wedge-marked tablet on screen, and even a fabricated gloss gains weight. The script looks like proof. The word translation dulls defenses. Few viewers can check a line. Fewer know how terms shift by genre and date. The authority costume works because clay feels honest. Finally, the internet rewards cliffhangers and certainty. If you leave a loop open, what do they really want? You'll get another watch. If you speak with a calm that never concedes doubt, you'll gain followers. Nuance loses in a feed. Our method tonight is slower. Read lines in place. Keep terms in their rooms. Test pictures against context. Where a claim leans on a single word, find that word in 3 tablets and watch it behave. Where a video points to a helmet, check the whole relief and see the crown, the robe, the rod and ring. Where someone whispers, Nibiru, open the late star lists and note how scribes use the title to mark crossings and kingship in the sky. We won't mock the appetites behind the myths. Wonder is fair. The rivers inspire it. The tablets earn it. But the strongest stories are the ones that survive contact with evidence. So we set the map on the table aliens. Gold, Nibiru Labs, giant sand. We promise a calm walk through each claim, using only what the clay will carry. First stop, the headline. Anunnaki as aliens. Debunk Anunnaki, as aliens' primary start with the word. In early Sumerian, Ana means the princely seat, the offspring of an the sky. In Akkadian, it becomes Anunnaki. It's a family title for senior gods, not a species label. Texts use it the way cities use the council or the elders. When hymns say the Anunnaki sat, they mean a high assembly convened and issued a decree. No tablet defines them as visitors from another world. Look at how they act. Their core functions are civic, scaled up. They decree destinies, witness oaths, approve kingship, sanction projects, and sit as judges. In creation scenes, they authorize a remedy to a labor crisis. In flood scenes, they deliberate policy and accept limits. In later ritual, they're called to enforce boundary stones and treaties. These are assembly actions, not landings. Iconography is consistent. Gods wear horned crowns, a regional sign of divinity. They hold rod and ring, symbols of measured authority. On seals, a human approaches a seated deity. The scene repeats across centuries because the message matters. Authority is granted and sized. Wings mark divinity on some figures. Rays mark radiance. None of these mean helmets or flight suits. Their visual shorthand in a world that carved ideas into stone. Language about coming from heaven doesn't point to outer space. In this tradition, the sky is the upper realm of the cosmos, paired with the earth below and the deep beneath. Kingship descends from heaven because legitimacy comes from the divine tier, not from a foreign planet. When a god descends, it's cult language for a statue's procession and the presence it represents. It's ceremony, not docking procedure. Consider their houses. Enlil's court at Nippur is a temple complex with courtyards, storerooms, and archives. Enki's Abzu at Eridu is rooted in the idea of sweet water beneath the land. These are theological maps matched to local geographies. No narrative turns these places into hangars, and no excavation has produced an out-of-place machine. Temples yield altars, drains, ovens, workshops, tablets, and offerings. The parts fit a city's life. Think about tools. When the texts get specific, they talk in the language of their craft. Reed, clay, rope, bitumen, baskets, plumb lines, measuring cords. They praise plans, decrees, and posted duties. They fix calendars to moons and mark years by festivals. They don't describe mechanisms outside their world. Myth borrows familiar objects to teach order. A sawtooth blade in the sun god's hand isn't a laser. It's justice as daylight. When later epics widen the assembly, the pattern holds. Marduk receives 50 names because imperial theology folds many functions into one office. Lists that count Anunnaki of heaven and earth are filing systems, not passenger manifests. A tablet of destinies appears as the emblem of authority as record. When stolen, chaos follows. When restored, command holds. Bureaucracy is the metaphor, not propulsion. What about phrases that sound like technology? Radiant aura belongs to divine presence. Terrifying splendor describes a response to rank. The Mesopotamian word melemu is awe you feel, not exhaust you smell. When a text says people trembled, it's describing reverence. The way crowds react to power in processions. Cult creates atmosphere by sound, scent, and light, not by engines. Where images are misread, context fixes them. A winged disk above a king is a symbol tied to sun and justice in royal art. A figure with a horned cap and a staff is a god in audience, not a pilot. A rosette or star is a divine marker, not a badge for a fleet. A relief with a tree is a ritual scene about order, not a schematic. There's also the simple matter of absence. If a culture had machines beyond its means, you'd expect stray artifacts or techniques in the ground that don't fit the toolkit. Alloys, bearings, fasteners, or shaped parts that don't match craft traditions. Excavations find clay, stone, wood, copper, bronze, gold, lapis, faience worked, with known techniques. The wonders are in scale and coordination, not in hidden materials. The behavior of the term across time argues against a species reading. In Sumer, Anana marks the high family tied to specific cities and domains. In Old Babylonian myth, the Anunnaki function as the senior assembly that speaks fate. In the first millennium, the title often moves to the underworld bench, 7 judges under Ereshkigal's rule. The continuity is authority and procedure, not biology. Pume stakes reveal why alien glosses appeal. A visitor from the stars makes origin easy. A council that demands rations, rosters, oaths, and calendars makes origin work. The tablets pick work every time. They honor it. They turn it into ritual, law, and song. So a canal crew and a king both feel seen. That's the Anunnaki's job inside the story. Make duty sacred and durable. So when someone says the Anunnaki were aliens, ask for a line. Ask for a tablet where the term is defined that way. Ask for an image that, in full, can't be read as divinity in local grammar. Then set that claim beside what the sources actually shows. Assemblies, decrees, oaths, calendars, judges, and the steady handoff of measured power. They're not visitors. They're the words a city used to bind heaven's authority to earth's needs. That's harder than a ship, and stronger. Debunk gold mining and space needs. If not aliens, then gold miners. That claim sounds tidy until you ask the ground and the tablets to answer. Mesopotamia's south is flat alluvium. No gold veins. No mountain shafts. Cities there glowed with imported metal, not mined treasure. The supply came by trade. Boats down canals to the Gulf, then on to Dilmun and beyond. Caravans from the north and east. Ledger after ledger tallies textiles going out. Copper and precious stones coming in. When gold appears in records, it's counted as finished items or ingots delivered, not or extracted from a local pit. Creation myths do mention labor transfer, but the work assigned to humans isn't tunneling in rock for export. It's temple service and field maintenance. Carry baskets, dredge canals, sweep courts, bake, brew, herd, and build. That's the list in Atrahasis, echoed by ordinary tablets that record rations for canal crews and grain for bakers. The economy that myths explain is a ritual. Economy offerings, festivals, redistribution run through temples and palaces, not an industrial complex feeding a distant atmosphere. Look at the places where metal truly came from in this world. Copper from Megan, likely Oman. Tin from far routes that stretched into Iran and beyond. Lapis from Afghanistan through long chains. Gold from Anatolia, Iran, and further circuits that tie the Near East to highlands. Mesopotamia sits as a hub that converts wool and grain into imported metal by trade. The structure is clear in texts and in the archaeology of port towns and staging sites. There's no evidence of deep shafts or ventilation systems on the southern plain. No tools for hard rock extraction. No slag from gold smelting at scale. Iconography used to sell the mining idea fares no better in context. A figure with a pointed cap and a basket on his back is a worker moving earth in a canal, not a miner underground. A god holding a saw-toothed blade signals justice and sunlight, not or processing. Horned crowns mark divinity, not helmets with breathing gear. Reliefs that sparkle in books come from royal graves and temple hoards, where gold was ritual wealth jewelry, vessels, fittings made to feed prestige and piety, not to settle debts to a sky empire. The logistics of a supposed gold export program also collide with reality. If a culture extracted gold for off-world needs, we would expect mining districts with spoil heaps. road spurs designed for heavy loads, and tool sets distinct from canal work, wedges, hammers, galleries, timbers. We don't find those in the southern sites. We find sickles, plumb lines, weaving tools, bread molds, ceilings from storerooms, and receipts for livestock and grains. The city's pulse is food-2-offering-2-festival-2-repair, not ore-2-ingot-2-launch. Ticks that praise gold do so as symbol and store of wealth. Hymns dress gods in gold and lapis because brilliance equals rank. Kings dedicate gold objects to temples as conspicuous piety. None of those lines are invoices. When gold is measured, it's in the same breath as beads, carnelian, shell, and textiles. That's luxury, not fuel. The clanned blood creation motif, often hijacked for a mining narrative, explains why humans can speak sacred words and receive cult, not why they fit a shaft. The floods reframe mortality, and spaced births responds to noise and crowding on fields and in courts, not to quotas missed in tunnels. Over and over, the myths align with irrigation, math, water, salt, labor, storage, timing. If you watch canals, these stories fit like a gear. Consider the one domain where Mesopotamia did pursue extraction at scale, bitumen. There we find real evidence, pits, lumps, coatings, because red boats and brickwork depended on it. That visibility is exactly what the gold tail lacks on the southern plain. Where there's need, there's footprint. The gold mining claim has none where it's supposed to be biggest. So where did the modern idea catch spark? A chain of conflations. Horned crowns become helmets. Temple hoards become stockpiles. Trade lists become supply chains to the sky. The word Anunnaki becomes a company badge. Remove context, and you can make a ritual economy look like an industrial one. Put context back, and the picture returns to form. A city feeding its gods, its workers, and its year. If you're still holding a doubt, use one test. Open any administrative tablet from the south that lists a major labor project. Your redredging crews, brick quotas, barley rations, beer allotments, redeliveries, corvée rotations. You won't read a single line assigning men to gold shafts on the plain. The silence isn't a gap, it's the answer. Debunk Nibiru and hidden worlds. The word at the center of this claim is late and precise. Nibiru appears in first millennium astronomical texts as a title and a crossing point. Sometimes it names Jupiter when that planet marks a key transition in the sky. Sometimes it marks the place where paths cross the node that helps scribes anchor their tables. It is a tool word inside a system that treats heaven like a ledger, not a nickname for a hidden world on a long, dangerous orbit. Open the star lists grouped under Enuma, Anu-Enlil, and related compendia. You find categories: stars of Enlil, Anu, and Ea, paths and stations, risings and settings tied to winds and weather. Nibiru lives in that framework. It's the crossing that lets a reader align the sky's loops with the calendar. Later glosses can call it the Star of Marduk. When Jupiter serves as the seasonal marker for a kingly planet, the meaning shifts by context. but never into a rogue planet narrative. No tablet lays out a story of a stealth world plunging through the inner system. No Omen series pairs Nibiru is seen with coast or ruin from planetary types. Instead, the texts pair eclipses with crops, halos with winds, conjunctions with politics. They ask, given this sign, what's the prudent timing? Not where do we hide from a world-sized visitor. The posture is risk management under a lawful sky. The astronomy we practice now makes the absence louder. Large bodies tug. A giant on a sweeping path would announce itself by pulling at known planets, and by glowing in infrared surveys long before it crossed anyone's path. Observatorious professional and amateur map the sky with patient redundancy. As they sweep in wide bands and post their find. When dates for a return have been set, often aligned with round numbers, those dates pass. The claim resets. New charts appear. The sky stays steady. Ancient scribes didn't treat the heavens as a rumor mill. They built tables and rules so that kings could plan. Jupiter loops because we pass it on the inside track. Venus flashes because it lives inside our orbit. Eclipses fall in families. Scholars of the first millennium tracked these patterns with a discipline that would feel familiar in any lab. They even used running tallies that could predict future appearances within a margin. If they had seen a long-period giant, their lists would strain to fit it. They don't. The rhetorical move that keeps Nibiru alive online is simple. Strip the word from its column and treat it like a proper name for a world. Then fuse it with a modern fear. The title gains drama it never held. The late texts lose their scaffolding. And a neat piece of scribal craft becomes a forecast it was never meant to bear. There's a second move, you'll notice. Imagery is cropped. A winged disk over a king becomes a planet with thrust. A lion dragon beside a gate becomes a creature from space. The captions invite your eyes to do the rest. But the full panels, the labels, and the rooms they lived in pull you back to ritual and civic pride. These are emblems in a city of festivals, not warnings from a watchtower. It helps to remember how these astronomers wrote. They didn't hide discoveries in a priestly vault. They copied. They taught. Libraries like the one at Nineveh shelved omen series and astronomical diaries beside hymns and rituals. A scribe in Babylon noted a conjunction and its weather in one line, a price of barley in the next. The sky was a clock that told them how to pace a year, not a stage for rare terror. If you want a test you can do at home, try this. Look up a public sky survey. Search for moving objects flagged in the outer system. You'll find comets, centaurs, trans-Neptunian bodies named and logged with paths you can watch, update. What you won't find is a world on appointment, skirting detection until a deadline. The cosmos doesn't keep secrets that big from a community that loves to measure. So, when you hear Nibiru here, crossing, when you see a date, expect it to slide. And when someone points to a tablet, open the series, read the column headers, and watch the word sit where it belongs. Mung markers that turn a bright, lawful sky into advice you can use. Debunk genetic engineering in clay. We've reached the claim that turns a ritual bowl into a lab bench. It says, Atrahasis describes gene splicing, that Enki is a technician, and that birth goddesses are staff in gowns. It sounds modern. It isn't what the tablets say. Start with the scene we already met. Clay from the life-bearing ground. Blood from a god whose name signals intelligence. Incantations. Counted months. A house of wombs. 7 and 7 midwife deities. Every ailment belongs to ritual and birth culture. Clay is the stuff of humans and bricks alike. Blood is life and status. Incantation frames intent. The womb house is a sacred chamber, not a sterile suite. The number 7 repeats because order likes it, not because it hides a protocol. Listen to the verbs. The texts say shape, mix, speak, carry, give birth. They don't say cut, splice, extract, insert. There's no vocabulary for genes, cells, or apparatus. The line about the god's blood carries a theological point. Why humans can speak sacred words, take oaths, and serve as partners. It explains why offerings are heard and why decrees can be understood. You don't need a microscope to reach that meaning. You need a city that believes language ties heaven and earth. The mother goddess's titles keep us grounded. Nintu Mummy Nin, her sag names linked to mountains, fertility, and midwifery. Their work in other texts is the same. Open the womb, soothe pain, ensure safe delivery. When a poem calls them, it's calling a birth team. You can feel the craft behind the lines. Counted months, careful timing. The relief when the doors open and the crowd breathes. That's midwife time, not machine time. Enki's role also fits his portfolio. He's the planner, the fixer, the one who finds humane roots when rigid order harms. His tools are counsel and cleverness. He assigns functions in the world order, teaches brickmaking and boat handling, arranges for midwives to learn their art. Nothing in his stories requires a lab. Everything in them honors skill with things people actually used. Reed, rope, clay, pitch, and words placed in the right order. Iconography won't rescue the modern claim. Bowls are bowls, chords are measuring lines. Styluses are for tablets. Horned crowns are divinity signs. The aura that radiates from gods is melamu, a charged presence that makes knees weak. It's theater in a sacred sense, not a field effect. When you set images back into their rooms, the machines disappear and the ritual returns. A quick detour helps. Later myths about special tablets, the tablet of destinies, treat authority as a written object. When stolen, order collapses. When restored, command holds. That's bureaucracy as symbol, not circuitry. The same habit appears in creation. Speech fixes roles, decrees. Stick records matter. A culture that treats writing as power will imagine births framed by recited lines, not by pipettes. The practical echoes are loud. Administrative tablets that track rations for canal crews sit beside hymns that praise the birth goddess. Law codes that punish moving a boundary stone sit beside rituals to ease labor. The logic binds. Labor is sacred. Birth is sacred. Both need procedure and witnesses. Creation by clay makes sense inside that web. It dignifies work and ties families to shrines that share their weeks and risks. Why does the lab reading persist? Because it flatters us. It makes the ancients sound like us, and it makes us feel older than we are. It also offers a shortcut through the messy truth that civilizations are built with hands, backs, and long calendars. Machines promise speed. Ritual demands patience. The tablets pick patience. If you want a single line to carry away, use this. Clay plus divine blood is a claim about vocation, not DNA. It says humans can understand divine order and keep a city running in step with it. It doesn't teach technique. It teaches duty. There is room here for wonder without contrivance. The idea that speech can bind worlds is big enough to rest in. The picture of midwives as divine partners is tender enough to honor. The sense that knowledge arrives in stages, that mercy corrects law, and that limits protect Lythos are insights that don't aid. So when you hear genetic engineering in clay, go back to the bowl, the chant, the count, the house of wombs. Go back to the first baskets lifted at dawn and the first oath sworn at dusk. The making in these lines is the making of a people who can carry work and worship together. That's the marvel on the tablet, and it's enough. Debunk Nephilim and cross-sex confusions. Now we come to the bridge people keep trying to build between Mesopotamian gods and a later line about giants. The impulse is tidy, same flood, same ancient time, so the casts must match. But sound like leaps are not reading. Languages are different. Dates are distant. And each tradition keeps its own house. Start with the shapes on the clay you've already met. Anunnaki means the princely seed. The high assembly tied to An. It names elders who decree destinies, grant kingship, witness oaths, and later sit as judges below. Their scenes are councils, courts, rituals, and city business. None of this language points to a race of oversized beings wandering fields. It points to offices, procedures, and a lawful cosmos. Now step into a different library. In a later tradition, a brief and difficult passage mentions beings called Nephilim, alongside sons of God and daughters of men. The line sits before its own flood story, and has sparked arguments for centuries about what it means. Scholars in that world debate grammar and context inside their canon. What's clear is that the Nephilim live as a problem inside the text's moral arc, not as a council that stabilizes a city's year. The confusion enters when a reader drags the Mesopotamian title across the river and plants it on the Nephilim, then comes back and claims the clay, confirms the giant tale. It's a loop built on resemblance and wish. The terms are unrelated. The timelines do brush, because flood stories travel. But motifs crossing borders aren't proof that characters do. A boat and a bird can pass through many books. Names belong at home unless a source moves them. Share the flood memories, the honest overlap. River peoples remember ruin. They keep birds in the story because a bird's behavior is a near-perfect gauge of land returning. They keep sacrifice because gratitude feels right when ground is underfoot. After that, theology diverges. In Mesopotamia, a council debates policy and sets limits on lifespan. In the Hebrew frame, a single judge grieves, cleanses, and promises not to repeat the act. These are distinct answers to fear, not a single cast in new costumes. Look at what each tradition wants from its figures. The Anunnaki guarantee decrees and lend weight to law. They're invoked on boundary stones to guard water rights. They sit like judges so that unpunished wrongs don't win by running out the clock. The Nephilim, in most readings, are not guarantors. They are part of a corruption problem before a reset. Different jobs, different stakes. You can test claims by asking for specifics. If someone says Anunnaki equals Nephilim, ask for a tablet where that identity appears. There isn't one. Ask for an inscription that links giant stature to the High Assembly. There isn't one. Ask for a ritual where a city calls the Nephilim to witness a treaty. There isn't one. What you'll find instead are kuduru, curses that summon the Anunnaki by title, laments that ask the senior court to return, and omen lists that assume, a sky that advises, no giants required. It helps to name the habit that fuels the mix-up. We're tempted to file every old symbol into one global folder. It feels efficient, but texts are like cities. They grow in place. They borrow materials, yes, but they arrange rooms to fit local streets and winds. Respecting that fact doesn't diminish a story, it makes it legible. When you let each tradition breathe, the best parts survive. The Mesopotamian Council still teaches how order is spoken, witnessed, and kept. The later tale still wrestles with violence, pride, and mercy under one sovereign. Parallel lines can sit side by side without being forced into a single braid. So keep the labels honest. The Anunnaki belong to tablets that love rosters, courts, and calendars. The Nephilim belong to a short, thorny line in a different book with a different aim. What travels cleanly between them is the memory of water rising and the human need to frame disaster with meaning. Everything else is better left in its own room. The work of the Anunnaki, administration at scale. If you strip the spectacle from the stories, what remains is work named, assigned, and witnessed. That's where the Anunnaki live day to day, as the senior board that turns cosmic order into tasks a city can carry. Start with the Mythocachapas. In hymns and lively tales, these aren't trinkets, they're functions. Kingship, justice, weaving, music, building, truth, victory, even rivalry when it has a use. Enki gathers them at Eridu. Inanna ferries are set to Uruk. It's a busy image of distribution, but the point is sober. Civilization runs on bundled competencies, and the High Court decides where they sit. When the Assembly assigns me, it's authorizing departments. From that authority flows staffing. Enki, in the world order, doesn't wave a wand. He marches domain to keeper. Rivers get guardians. Grain and cattle get responsible hands. Mountains, marsh, and seacoast receive overseers suited to their terrain. It feels like an irrigation office, because it is. The Anunnaki approve the roster and let craft meet place. Kingship passes through the same gate. A ruler isn't real until recognized. The formula says Enlil fixes fate at Nippur. The practice says priests and people accept the office. The Assembly's signature makes a person a function. In reliefs, rod and ring confirm that truth. In texts, oaths in the names of the Anunnaki bind the rain to law and calendar. Power is measured, not improvised. Calendars are the court's long reach. Festivals aren't parties first. They're timekeepers. New moons start ledgers. Planting and harvests bind city and shrine in a rhythm that reduces risk. The omen corpus belongs here. Enuma Elish doesn't predict doom. It schedules prudence. A halo with a wind means wait. A bright pairing means move. The Anunnaki's sky is a bulletin board that guides budgets, marshes, and repairs. Underworld judgment is administration too. The seven below aren't villains, they're continuity. Files that daylight misses are heard at depth. Kispu offerings beer water, bread keep. Names current in the archive. Namburbi rituals are legal tactics. Act before fate hardens. The assembly above once spoke. The bench below preserves. Together they make promises extend across funerals and fires. Boundary stones show the system in the field. A kuduru grants land, lists obligations, calls witnesses by symbol, and ends with curses that only sound cruel until you feel a canal's fragility. May the Anunnaki dry your fields is a fence you can hear. The court's threat makes a surveyor's line visible when memories fade and heirs press. Mercy fits inside order without breaking it. Enki's role is the pattern. Soften a harsh decree with a workaround that keeps rules intact. In Atrahasis, he speaks through a wall to keep an oath's letter while saving a remnant. In later ritual, substitutions redeem vows. Ransoms ease penalties, laments invite returns. The Anunnaki's administration has appeal procedures. Crisis management sits on the same rails. Laments are petitions in verse. Not only grief, they name damages, confess faults, promise reforms, and invite the senior court to reverse a fate. Foundation deposits under rebuilt walls file the request in clay. When a patron's statue processes back through a gate, it is a public notation, approval restored. The board has reauthorized the plant. Education feeds the machine. Scribal schools copy hymns, king lists, lawsuits, omens, and proverbs, because administrators need range. How to count, how to swear, how to time, how to speak. The Anunnaki appear across genres so that a clerk can invoke them in the correct tone, whether he's sealing a jar or drafting a treaty. Literacy is policy. Theology supplies the header. But even war is domesticated. Campaigns are timed by signs and seasons. Before marching, kings swear to spare certain precincts. Afterward, spoils fund repairs and rights. Victory inscriptions still credit approvals from above. The Assembly's oversight insists that force sits under schedule and oath. It can be fierce, but it isn't free. When the seating chart shifts, rise, widened assemblies, the work doesn't change, only the routing. 50 names consolidate functions to match a capital's scale. 300 above and 300 below file under a center. The Anunnaki remain the rubric that makes it all legible. Who speaks? Who witnesses? Who records? What makes this administration humane is its attention to limits. Mortality curbs crowding. Sabbaths of a salt festival. Rest bleed off strain. Debt remissions appear after disasters. The court favors measured plenty over endless growth. Enough is policy. The sky helps by telling time. The archive helps by remembering. The bench helps by closing cases without malice. If you want the Anunnaki at work, watch a canal crew on a calendared morning. Their rations are tallied from an offering list. Their foreman swore an oath by Shamash and the Anunnaki to keep weights fair. The project was approved at Nipper in a festival season. A scribe logs progress using a sign list he learned by copying a hymn. At dusk, someone pours a cup for the family dead so names don't thin. That's the court's daily rich quiet, exact everywhere. How the term shifted over time. From the start, the title carried more weight than a roster. In early Sumer, Ana meant the princely seed, the high family of An. Hymn's picture, a senior circle that sat to speak destinies. The focus is pedigree and counsel, not a fixed head count. The gods are anchored to cities Enlil, at Nipa Enki, at Eridu, Inanna, at Urukand. The group name gathers them as elders whose words make years run straight. As city life thickened, the language tightened. In old Babylonian texts like Atrahasis, Anunnaki functions as the label for the high assembly that solves problems. The junior gods revolt. A council convenes. A remedy is decreed. Humans take up labor. The title points to process. In flood policy, the same circle deliberates, measures, binds itself with oaths, and ultimately accepts limits proposed by a humane voice. The council's authority is procedural rather than personal. It matters that they speak, record, and abide by the first millennium. The word often sits in a different room. The same senior powers are pictured on the underworld bench as the 7 judges, seated with Ereshkigal. The descent tradition shows their stance with no ornament. They look, pronounce, and enter a decision in the deep archive. Gilgamesh echoes this when it says the Anunnaki decree death. The shift isn't a contradiction. It's a redistribution of duty across layers. What's spoken above is enforced below. A city that trusts records trusts the idea of a court that outlasts bodies. Alongside that underworld focus, imperial theology widens the assembly. Enuma Elish stages a vote that raises Marduk and folds older functions into a single office with 50 names. Lists now speak of Anunnaki, of heaven and earth, a filing scheme that matches a larger state. 300 above, 300 below is a neat symmetry, not a census. The term stretches to cover a grander seating chart without losing its spine. Witness, decree, sanction. Assyrian versions swap names at the front inerta or Ashur, where Marduk once stood, yet the rubric holds. Kings claim victories by divine authorization. Omen series time campaigns. Boundary stones summon the Anunnaki to guard grants. The old title has become institutional glue, binding shifting capitals to a stable grammar of legitimacy. Even when the underworld bench grows detailed with boatmen, clerks, wardens, the Anunnaki tag keeps the senior judges legible. This elasticity shows up in small genres too. In incantations, the Anunnaki can be invoked as enforcers against oath breakers, disease, or restless spirits powers that finalize cases. In proverbs and instructions, the name stands for the expectation behind rules. Don't move a boundary stone because the High Court hates disorder. In laments, the title marks the only audience that can reverse a fate. The word is a key that opens different doors in different centuries, always into rooms about order. What never appears across these shifts is a species identity or a technology tag. The term doesn't drift toward machines. It drifts toward procedure. Early Sumer emphasizes lineage and counsel. Old Babylonian myth emphasizes policy and labor. First millennium usage emphasizes judgment and empire-scale coordination. The thread is sober, order is spoken, witnessed, and kept by an elder circle whose scope the city imagines as needed. Why did the seat move? Partly because the world, as polity scaled, theology centralized, as archives thickened, judgment gained, layers appeal, above, enforcement below. As memories stretched across disasters, communities needed a bench that could hold oaths past death. The title answered each need by shifting rooms without changing job description. So when you meet Anunnaki on a tablet, ask where you're standing. In a Sumerian hymn, you're in a bright court that fixes fates. In an old Babylonian narrative, you're watching policy drafted. In a first millennium dissent or curse, you're at a deep bench that closes files. In an imperial hymn, you're in a hall where hundreds file under a sentence. Same word, same work, new desks. Why the internet misrepresents them. We've spent time with clay. Now let's talk about screens. The gap between tablets and thumbnails isn't an accident. It's a system with incentives that nudge stories away from councils and towards spectacle. Start with pace. Tablets reward patience, genre, context, parallel lines. The internet rewards speed. A horned crown becomes a helmet if you don't pause to see that horns mean divinity across Mesopotamia. A winged disc becomes a thruster if you don't read hymn-it heads. Cropped images and quick captions beat footnotes in a feed. The platform favors the shot that looks like a reveal, then authority. Clay looks like proof even when the gloss is wrong. A presenter can say ancient translation and hold a tablet without showing the lines. Viewers can't check. Most don't know Sumerian from Akkadian, or why Inanna in a hymn isn't the same as Anunnaki in a first millennium curse. The costume works, museum case, soft light, sober tone. The caption slides in and claims a meaning the room doesn't support. Simplicity tugs at us. Real civilizations are mexicanal rosters, ration lists, oaths, delays. Aliens and hidden planets are neat. They turn hard wins into clean gifts. They turn gradual change into a single visit. They also spare us from the slow pride of brick and barley. A launch solves more quickly than a calendar. Add suspense. What they hid is a stronger hook than what we can read. Cliffhangers keep viewers through ads. Certainty boosts shares. Nuance sounds like doubt. So a term like Nibiru gets peeled from late star lists and sold as a rogue world with a date. The date slips. A new date appears. Attention rolls on. Primages mislead when they're orphaned. Boundary stones, the Kujuru, are dense legal documents with curse lists that call the Anunnaki to witness. Online, a macro shot of one deity symbol is recast as a device. A relief of a king before Shamash becomes a briefing with a control panel if you blur the rod and ring. The Hopis Redingrant oath. Witnesses slow. The cropped thrill is quick. There's also the hunger to belong to a secret. If you learn a special glossy that clay and blood is code for gene splicing. You feel initiated. That feeling travels. It builds communities. It frames scholars as gatekeepers to be outflanked rather than guides to be heard. A calm citation looks like a defense. A confident speculation feels like a discovery. Immediate incentives shape the cast. A documentary needs tension to hold an hour. A debate needs two sides with sharp edges. So priests who read become elites who hide. Assemblies that decree become boards that conspire. The story moves from administration to thriller because thrillers test better in the slot after dinner. The internet also flattens time. A first millennium omen list sits beside a third millennium hymn in one slideshow. A Neo-Assyrian relief sits with a Sumerian seal. Viewers aren't told that words shift by century. A term that meant elders above in one text means judges below in another. And the shift is the story. Flatten it, and you can make any term point anywhere. We should admit comfort as a cause. It's gentler to say that someone else did the hard start for us. It's kinder to think that meaning arrived as a package. The tablets argue for a different consolation. Shared work, regular rites, careful law. That's not flashy, but it lasts. What's the antidote? Context on repeat. Show the whole relief. Name the room it lived in. Say what genre you're reading and why that matters. Keep terms in their era. Put Nibiru back in the column header that says crossing. Put Anunnaki back in the court scenes that speak fate. Pair text with ground canals Kuduru library so claims touch soil. Then use the same tools good myths use. Open a small mystery, but close it with evidence. Shift perspectives to keep attention, but never trade rooms. If a claim leans on one word, show 3 tablets where that word behaves. Wonder will survive the work. It always has. The map of memory, cities and sites. Let's walk the ground that gave these words their weight. Start at Eridu, far in the south, where sweet water rises under salt wind. Archaeologists found a stack of temples here, one layered atop another, each a quiet upgrade of the one below. It's a stairway of memory in brick. This matches Enki's seat in Story's wisdom at the edge, where fresh and salt meet. The place explains the title without a speech. Water, plans, beginnings. Move north and the ziggurat of your lifts from the plain in sure lines. Its stairways face the sun like a measured prayer. Nearby, the royal cemetery told a harsher truth, splendor, and farewell arranged with care. Lyres, carnelian, gold fittings, built for rites below. You see why later tablets speak of judges in the deep, and why families kept offerings. Even luxury bows to a rule about ending. Uruk is skill. The mounds spread like a low city under dust. Here, districts for Inanna and Unrose on platform. Courts opened into halls, and the first long habit of writing grew from tallies to hymns. Inanna's tale of ferrying culture home reads like news. When you trace streets that guided processions and markets that fed them. Uruk is where civic pride learnt to spell. Nipper looks modest at first glance, but this was the Ika Enlil's ground. The precincts, plank, courtyards, shrines, magazines, tablet, rooms, turns, decree, destiny into architecture. A king's envoy would stand here, oath ready, as petitions moved like clay birds from room to room. When texts say kingship is fixed at Nippur, the bricks back the line. Approval needed a place. The gash lies open to the sky. Early reforms scratched on stone here sound like minutes from a tough meeting. Abuses checked, widows named, canal rights defended. You can feel why Kuduru curses are so sharp. If someone moves a marker, a harvest dies. Call the Anunnaki by title. Carve their symbols, and let anyone who reads know the case is already filed. Kish held a northern gate. The king list credits it with early rule after the flood. Trenches here cut through earth the color of baked bread, with hints of fortification and long traffic. Its claim as a sentinel fits the tone of oaths and alliances. When a city watches approaches, it loves documents. It asks for witnesses who outlast campaign. Shurapuk brings you close to the flood's nerve. Excavations revealed a band of clean river clay between city levels. Not world-ending, but city-ending enough. Read Atrahasis after holding that layer. Boat instructions and bitumen sound like a neighbor's advice, not a parable. The reed wall warning feels right in a house made of reed and mud. Myth bends close to ground here. Ashur, farther north on the Tigris, shows a different tempo. Palaces and courts, trade letters and omen reports. A god who lent his name to kings. Here the old titles live in an empire's mouth. The Anunnaki are invoked beside new centers because the grammar of legitimacy traveled well. A state that wins still wants papers in order. Mari sits on a bend of the Euphrates, with palaces that held hundreds of rooms and archives thick with letters. Governors complained about barley shortfalls. Priests logged omens. Merchants bargained routes. The Anunnaki enter in the background, a shared vocabulary for oaths. A council far away made words portable. That's what lets treaties cross rivers. Nineveh and Nimrod keep the best library lesson. Ashurbanipal's shelves held epics, omens, rituals, copies upon copies. The flood tablet that startled a modern reader was just one piece of a careful hoard. The presence of Enuma Enlil beside him shows how cities stitched heaven's schedule to civic time. The Anunnaki were the seal at the bottom of that stitch. Babylon is ceremony turned city. The Ishtar gates glazed brilliance, the processional way. The temple quarter where the New Year rite walked the year into Places is where Enuma Elish earned breath. When lists divide Anunnaki of heaven and earth, you're hearing a filing habit in a capital that loved lists. 50 names for Marduk. That's consolidation. You can parade. The Iraq Museum anchors much of this in one quiet set of rooms, as do cases in London, Paris, Berlin. But the real address is still the floodplain. Marshes revived in the south. Date palms line canals that still trace older cuts. Ziggurat steps still warm in morning light. A tablet with a thumbprint still says, I was there. Methods keep the mat honest. Layers, not trophies. Find spots, not guesses. A tablet in a trash pit by a temple kitchen can teach offerings better than a tablet with no home. survey lines traced from satellite photos' knee boots. When those lines match Kuduru grunts and drainage, the tablets feel local again. The Anunnaki's authority returns to the soil that needed it. Lay these sites on a table, and the outline we've chased settles into place. Wisdom at a water edge. Pride in a city that writes. Authority seated where approval is staged. Law in open fields and tight courts. Empires borrowing old grammar for new reach. Libraries that kept oaths breathing after walls fell. The title travels because the needs repeat, and the ground still answers when you ask. The human thread, work, law, limits, mercy. Strip away the pageantry and you're left with people. A canal crew at dawn, baskets lined in a row. A foreman counting rations with a stylus dart from clay. In these small scenes the Anunnaki matter most, because their court turns simple chores into shared duty. Work isn't just toil, it's a trust. Atrahasis framed it plainly. Humans would lift what junior gods could not keep lifting. The city honored that with rhythms. Weeks marked by bare allotments. Corvée rotations for dredging. Temples as kitchens for the gods, and storehouses for crews. A basket becomes more than a tool when a hymn says, the year leans on it. Law grows from that same ground. A boundary stone isn't a symbol first. It's a fence that keeps a field alive. That's why a Kuduru piles up, witnessized the sun god for daylight justice. City gods for local memory, and the Anunnaki to bind the oath beyond any one life. The curse is red fierce because survival is narrow in a delta. Move a marker and you don't steal an acre. You break a canal's math. So a scribe scratches lines that say, in effect, the highest court is watching, and a tenant sleeps better, knowing a future heir can unroll a tablet and find the promise intact. Limits arrive as care, not spite. The flood stories end with ceilings, shorter lives, pauses in fertility, quieter nights. That isn't misanthropy, it's ecology. The council chews us enough over more, which makes room for mercy inside order. You hear the same thought in calendars. Festivals aren't only joy, they're scheduled rest that protects bodies and fields. They slow a city on purpose. Even debt remissions after disaster show a preference for reset rather than grind. A measured world is kinder than an endless climb. Mercy has a face in Enki. He is the voice that bends without breaking. When the assembly swears silence, he speaks to a reed wall. When a rigid decree harms, he finds a path that keeps the letter while saving the spirit. That pattern echoes in rituals of substitution and ransom, in laments that admit fault and ask for return, in the quiet fact that a plea can be filed before fate hardens. The Anunnaki are stern in principle and supple in practice. That balance is what lets people trust them. The underworld bench makes kindness serious. Families bring water and bread so the dead won't fade into dust alone. Kispu rites are small mercies performed on a schedule, a way to say names and keep ties. The 7 judges don't comfort, they uphold procedure. But that steadiness gives families a frame. If wrongs weren't settled above, they can be settled below. If love needs a habit, the calendar supplies it. In a land where loss came often, routine remembrance was its own soft law. Work, law, limits, mercy watch, how they braze. A canal crew signs on because an oath by the Anunnaki holds the foreman to fair weights. A calendar set by the assembly gives them rest days that keep shoulders and tempers from breaking. A boundary stone guards their harvest. If a flood ruins a season, remissions and laments reopen the path. And always offerings fold their effort back to the chord that made it meaningful. The divine assembly isn't distant here. It's a set of names you say when you need a promise to last. Even war bends to this braid. Kings test omens, swear vows, time marches, and close campaigns with rites that stitch civic life back together. Victory boasts still invoke approvals, because force without witness is only noise. The Anunnaki's presence underlines a thesis. Power is legitimate when it sits inside procedure and remembers limits. It's a sober ideal, but it kept cities livable more often than not. This is why the modern alien gloss falls flat alongside the human thread. A ship erases the slog. A council dignifies it. The tablets choose the latter. They care about weights, shares, calendars, and names recited on time. They turn work into worship without lying about strain. They make law feel older than any throne. They set limits that preserve a world worth waking into. And they leave room for mercy quiet, clever, and timely so people can start again. How to read against the noise. Read lines in place, not in wish. Match genre and era. Anchor claims with Atrahasis, Enuma Elish, Descent, and Omen series. Pair text with ground canals, floods, Kudiru, watch patterns, councils, decrees, calendars. Keep wonder, retire the spaceship. The Anunnaki mark, order spoken, witnessed, kept. Thank you for listening to Whispering Tomes tonight. If this journey into the truth of the Anunnaki helped you relax, unwind, or simply see history a little more clearly, I'm glad you were here. Until next time, may your evening be quiet, your rest be deep, and your curiosity stay warm as candlelight. Good night. And thank you for listening to Whispering Tomes.